And if all of our panelists would come back online, we do have some questions streaming in, and I would love to take the time and to open this up for discussion. And and as we're talking, if you're out there, please continue to send in your questions. We see those, and I don't know that we'll get to all of them today, but we will try to follow up as well, even if we can't get to some things on the live session. So I thought I'd start off, Jochen, with you. So I've heard you and I heard Robert talk about this as a journey. And I'm curious about the start of the journey. How hard was it for you to build an internal consensus within DT to pursue an open networking strategy for Access 4.0?
So the question was, how hard was it to start the program and convince everyone around? Was that the question? To get a buy-in and management buy-in to start that?
That's right, correct.
Yeah, I would say, okay, let me start like the following. I think on a very generic level, it was very easy because I think there is a lot of consensus in our top executive management that the way I described to go hyperscaler, to use hyperscaler paradigms to re-architect our architecture, our entire business system around these new paradigms, disaggregation, cloudification, automation. There's a huge consensus in our top management that this is the way to go. Now, if you look into specific implementation, if you then now try to actually bring that into your day-to-day operations, I think you're always facing, and this is an age-old question, you're always facing that, I would call it like the innovator dilemma, right? Like Christensen described in his book, which is if you have a well-run current operation, yeah, where processes are known, people know what to do, you very easily fall into the trap of saying, oh, things run very, very well. Why should we change at all? Why should I reskill? Why should I have another organization? We are very good. And after all, we won a lot of in fact, in mobile networks, 10 consecutive years, the network leadership tests. So it's very tempting to say, we are very good, but you have to accomplish that paradigm shift. And on paper, this is very easy, but then putting that into practice, and Robert knows what I'm talking about. We are fighting on day-to-day basis to get the business case going, to make it work with the first tenant application, as I said, not just have a big upfront invest, but trying to bring concrete business cases in a shorter period of time to make something work that is laid out over the next decade for transformation. That is very hard. To hit the life cycle, which is currently going on, life cycle changes in technology, hit the right point in time where you say, now the technology is mature enough to bring it into live network, just as Robert said. We have the ambition to be a quality leader and have a stable network. In the current situation of the pandemic, there is no compromise to that. And there's also no compromise to cost performance. So now bringing that from a lab and trial into a concrete, committed rollout is really the hard part. The execution of it. And this is what Robert and team is doing, making sure the execution works. Because my part is the easiest. I can, present slides with high-level ambitions, but these guys actually are fighting to implement that each and every day. And we have a lot of discussions around that, how to make it work. So, yeah, long story short, it's easier said than done.
Okay, good. So, so maybe next question to Robert. Easier said than done, and Robert's really in charge of getting it done, right, in the execution piece. So, so Robert, operators have historically looked to a prime vendor to take responsibility for a project like this, and so, in this new world, the open networking, this disaggregation, approach that you've described, how do you and how does DT think of prime ownership now in this new era and with Access 4.0?
Well, it's a paradigm shift. I'm repeating this very word. Now we have it at our hands, so we could take over responsibility of our network. Do we want this? I think it has not fully been decided yet how we want to go about. We also have Reply as our co-development partner here. They take on quite a lot of responsibility, I mean, ultimately, it's our network, it's our customers. It's not Reply nor, you know, Sienna nor Atran customers. It is, you know, our customers. The chance that I see here in softwareization is to take ownership, more ownership, and, you know, go up the value chain. And I personally see lots of benefits in there, because this can also help in network differentiation. And I personally believe in that.
Yeah,
If
good.
I might add to that, if I might add to that, so
Sure.
this is also something which we are which we are currently trying to sort out in a way of finding the optimum. We had examples where we barely, you know, were doing, you know, or in detail controlling anything, up to the point where every nut and bolt and every nitty-gritty detail has been under our control. And so also with this new technology, we're trying to find an answer. What is the right level of abstraction and control we need to have for driving such programs? And you know, and it basically all boils down to the question, where do we can differentiate? What do we need to own in order to differentiate? And what can we easily buy? And this even boils down to the question, how much of an integrator role can be sourced from someone as opposed to having that in-house? And what part of the architecture does it apply to? And how much do we actually want to control? And it revolves around the question, where do we differentiate, as always? Yeah.
And it sounds like that's still an ongoing question for you, work in progress.
Yeah, it's actually never ending, because you constantly, with a changing environment, with changing competition models, you have to constantly reevaluate. We have an idea, we have of course, a roadmap where we want to go to, and a hypothesis we are currently executing on. But again, we constantly, year on year, you know, reassessing that and trying to adapt if need be.
But with Sabre, at least we have the chance that we can have this discussion, you know. Before that,
Right.
It was limited. That is the good point. So we can have a meaningful discussion regardless of the outcome.
Exactly. You have an option. You have an option which you previously didn't have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and the option is even broader. So you're speaking about it from a DT perspective, and there's a lot of opportunity and challenge there. You know, maybe a question for Aseem, you know, because also inside the ONF, there's more than just one operator involved with SIBA and Volta and all of this. And so, you know, are there, and, you know, from your perspective, because you play a role, you know, helping multiple operators collaborate together, you know, so, what do you, what's your view on the unique challenges of working with multiple operators as they pursue creating a common shared platform like SIBA?
We have been pretty blessed that the operators who have come together under the ONF umbrella and supported us have all been, obviously, by their very definition, forward-looking and thinking about the next the journey, as Deutsche Telekom calls it, right? So it's not been very hard in getting people aligned on the high-level ideals of disaggregation, SDNization, softwareization, virtualization, you know, all the stuff which Jochen and Robert talked about. Obviously, every operator has a different perspective on how they do operationalization or OSS, BSS choices. They also have different kind of process-related workflows. And what SIBA and other platforms, you know, enable us to do is by creating multiple workflows specific to every operator's needs, you know, with a little bit of tweaking, so that each operator can get their personalized view or personalized process implemented on top of SIBA. So in general, it's not been very hard. I guess as the community of operators who adopt this grows, there is going to be more requirements which will kind of start coming in. And that's where the community will come in and say, yes, this is the undifferentiated 60-70% of the lower end of the stack. The 30% which is differentiated and, you know, has to be customized for you, you know, the system integrators and other vendors, software vendors can go and do that for operators. And that model seems to be working out well. And, you know, I hope that works out going forward.
And if I may chime in from an operator perspective, I know this question was addressed to Aseem. I really thank the ONF and especially Sorath and Andrea for helping here with the Volta deployment, because what you need is you need to buy credibility. And if you see ONF people, they deliver the releases, you know, they deliver to what they have promised, then of course you get the engagement of other operators because they see the benefit, okay, this community can actually help and not just, you know, we're not talking about slideware, we're talking about real code that is supposed to go to production.
Yeah, very good. And just for those who are on the call today, you know, tomorrow there's a keynote at the same time, and Saurabh's going to be speaking along with Turk Telekom and going a bit deeper. But that's right. So ONF has a whole engineering team that's really, working on all this. So, switching gears a touch, we have a couple of different questions coming in. I'm going to try to merge them together, and maybe the common thread here is maybe for Jochen. What's your view and what's DT's view on merging mobile and broadband access? Fiber to the home and 5G, or it's also the questions coming in with Ether, another ONF project, and does that kind of have a place and a fit in Access 4.0 or in your view for where access is headed? Can you share a little bit with us?
This is a very interesting question, and I doubt I don't have all the answers. So I think, first of all, from a infrastructure perspective, we are currently looking into what is an optimum topology to share deployments of passive infrastructure. It begins with passive infrastructure, fiber infrastructure, answering, do you have fiber in all the locations where you need to have 5G radio deployments? So obviously, there is a lot of potential on the CapEx side to share infrastructure. I mean, I'll leave aside now for a moment the question of redundancy, yeah. But if you take that away, there is obviously potential to map those fiber graphs on top of each other and trying to have synergies as much as possible as far as and security and availability of those two different networks is concerned. Then the next thing is the question, can you have a common aggregation strategy towards a common converged edge cloud? And even if that common converged edge cloud, I would say, from my gut feeling today, it should be a common architecture, because that simplifies, the supply. Basically, that gives you economies of scale. You reutilize components. It is the same operational processes, harmonization on the infrastructure as a services layer, as well as on above, like CI/CD pipeline process, etc. So you should have common architectures. Again, does it need to be on the same topology, on the same sites? I doubt it, because of availability and security reasons, but it should consist of the same components. Why not? Because that simplifies procurement and expandability of those solutions for other scenarios. So again, I would distinguish that question in what layer of the architecture are we talking about? Are we talking about physics? Yes, there might be the potential, there might be a big CapEx opportunity. Architecture-wise, I think it should converge very soon, as discussed in COMAC and such architectures. And then again, we can tackle that even from another perspective, from the product and market perspective. Is it the same, ultimately the same product? I mean, very generically, if you discuss connectivity very generically, yes, both of them deliver connectivity. But I think we know that in certain home networking scenarios or connectivity scenarios, there won't be a substitute for a fiber all the way to the user. So I don't think all of those scenarios will be ultimately replaced from a client user perspective by 5G, even if 5G will bring a lot of performance and substitute a lot of scenarios. Yeah, so it might make some interim solutions we even have today, where we have fixed and mobile combined solutions, maybe obsolete because 5G will be enough for many of them. It might even be an answer for rural, 5G not, but wireless will be answers for rural areas to have sufficient bandwidth for those subscribers. But again, I don't think it will be in all cases a complete substitute from a product perspective. So I hope this is a very many facets to the question. I hope this gives you an idea what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's an exciting area and a lot of potential, but clearly a lot of decisions to be made moving forward. Interesting. So, a couple of other questions coming in around DevOps, CI/CD, and sort of embracing cloud-like ways of approaching Access 4.0 development and deployment. And so, maybe for Robert to start off, maybe one way to, or any surprising learnings that you can point to around, the way you've restructured and the way you're operating in this DevOps model? I mean, I think it was Jochen who mentioned that you're bringing together engineering and planning and operations. And I think that all of us who've been in this telco space for a while have always talked about really this separation from those groups historically. Now that DT is really bringing them together, anything you can share with us today?
Well, I hopefully be able to share very soon that, we have this clash of culture, so to speak, between the dev people and the ops people. First of all, we're still working in the dev mode to get all the functionality ready to go live. That is really key. But at the same time, we are also ramping up the operations part. And this shift towards stable operations, improving operational processes, we will probably see in the project really starting end of November and going, throughout 2021. And there we definitely, I will make the clear decision to say that operational stability goes before new features. Currently, we do not see this because we are not live yet. We're still ramping up, but this will be my guideline already now. And we're working on this. And because I also looked at the Q&A, there's also questions on the business case. I mean, money is not just in hardware, it is also in processes, and really significantly, at least what I can say about DT. So do not underestimate smooth processes. There is lots to gain.
Timon, if I may ask a follow-up question, let's have a discussion. Why not?
Sure.
Things with CI/CD is one thing, but how about, are you planning to use things like test A/B test kind of scenarios where you can deploy new releases to one particular or two particular central offices, see how that goes before you and try new services like that or new upgrades like that?
At least this is on the radar. Yeah. First of all, really, it's plain FTTH. Yeah, with our double and triple play products, that's it. But of course, we want to go into the discussion with our marketing, with our product marketing, and try out. And I mentioned earlier, and I really mentioned this on purpose, that we want to break away from the single service edge architecture. So if somebody comes around the vendor and said, I have this beautiful service edge, we can really incorporate into our leaf spine fabric and, get out a product very soon. Of course, we would do this with a canary deployment, in, as you just mentioned, in a handful of places. But then if we see test runs well, we are fine with the technology, we can really, like this, bring it out to the entire market. If physics allow, of course. But from a software perspective, all the tools are there. We did not invent them as DT, of course, and nor did the ONF. There is much that the community overall has shared on CI/CD, and we all benefit from that. And that's why I really personally want to give something back.
All right, very good. And so maybe in closing, a last question. Maybe start with Jochen in this case. I think you mentioned differentiation and competition. And I wonder if you could just say a touch more. Like in this open source world, sharing common platforms and common components. How do you differentiate with your competition? How do you view that?
Well, again, if you look at, or if you remember the architecture, the layer architecture I was describing, I don't think there is in the future a lot of differentiation on the network layer, on the component layer. So I think here the major driver is what we said and what Robert explained in more detail, the changeability of those systems, which we do not have today. I mean, the first thing we have to do here, and let's face it, if you look at the BMG architecture, it is, well, it is 10 years ago, it was a modern architecture, but we wouldn't consider that a hyperscaler-like flexible and changeable architecture. I mean, imagine an application sitting on top of a hyperscaler infrastructure, and there is dependencies between this infrastructure. I mean, a big deal of dependencies between infrastructure and this application. It would be crazy. You wouldn't call Amazon as a user of the cloud and say, hey, guys, change something in this data center, change the hardware. It's not even visible to you. You don't even care. They have an independent life cycle. You have an independent life cycle of your software. But if you look into network services today, it's not the case. It's just not the case. So if people ask me what's the differentiator for doing that, I say, well, have flexibility, have changeability in the first place, which we don't have. And then comes speed up of things. So if marketing then asks me to do a new network service, I could potentially then be much faster. I'm not talking here about months and years. I'm talking about days, weeks time frame. So this is the first thing. But I don't think if it comes to competition, our competition, this is where the story ends, because at the end of the day, I was describing in that layered architecture picture this open APIs towards the upstream, towards partners, such as mobile edge, which Deutsche Telekom founded. And I think here lies much more potential if you think about network exposure functions in 5G and APIs like that. I think that's where you ultimately have to find an answer. How do you enable upstream partners to make business on top of your network? What value can you offer them in terms of location data, authentication data, other things? Provided all the legal and regulatory things are given in the respective markets. But I think that is where you can then, and Aseem had this slide, I believe, reshuffle resources, creative resources from changing infrastructure, modernizing infrastructure, more and more into service creation. So I will have this internal discussion: how do you automate as much as possible to reduce on, manual effort and workforce in your operational processes, which usually don't add value, and reallocate that to value creating activities, used to create upstream potential and create new products and services. And this is what we have to enable with that transformation, because as long as you bind massive resources in fixing your network, upgrading your network, running your network, these creative resources are tied to this and cannot think about new service offerings in the way they should be.
Good. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for all of you for participating today. I think, a set of great talks, and I appreciate the discussion at the end here. So I also want to thank our sponsors today and our entire community for participating. We had a great turnout for the event. And with that, Denise, for closing out the event, I want to hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on today's webinar, and thank you to our keynote speakers today. Thank you again to our sponsors, AT&T, Vector Data, Radisys, and the Open Compute Project for sponsoring this program, and to all of our ONF members whose contributions have funded all of ONF's engineering efforts on SIBA, Volta, and the other 20 projects that comprise ONF's portfolio for open source platforms and solutions for broadband, mobile, and next-gen SDN infrastructure. Thank you for joining us.